Good afternoon. My name is Stuart Blythe. I'm Associate Professor in Preaching and Worship at Acadia Divinity College. I'm also the Director of the Simpson Lectures. I'm pleased to welcome those of you who are here in the room to this workshop, and it may be we also have some people joining online, so we welcome you also. This workshop is going to focus on the voice. I am really pleased that we've got Dr. Christianne Rushton, who is going to come and present this for us. I think it's a topic of fantastic interest. I depend upon my voice for my living. It's the only kind of real instrument I have, and therefore this is particular interest to me and hopefully to you. She is a professor, she's a director at the School of Music. And in addition to that, those of you who know her will know that she's an excellent singer and uses her own voice. I'm not sure if she's ever preached, but I have a suspicion she's heard many people preach and at times had wondered, what on earth are they doing? Thank you for giving us of your time. Thank you for coming along. Please extend a welcome. Thank you.
I like to walk, so I'm going to use this guy for now. Thank you for the warm welcome. And I'm delighted to see more than one person here. I would have been happy to have one. And honestly, in music, in the field of music, the one-on-one relationship is extremely powerful, and that chemistry can add so much to our education. So I truly don't mind if it's just one, but I'm delighted to have you all here. And hello, those of you that are out in the cyber universe, thank you for joining us. Stuart, thanks for the invitation. This is a real honor to be part of the Simpson Lectures. I grew up listening to my grandparents talk about going to the Simpson Lectures. They would prepare and do research and talk about it for days before and days afterwards. And so this is a very full circle, quite honoring moment for me. So thank you for including me in your week. I appreciate it so much. Really, I designed today's session as a how-to guide, right? You know those books, Something for Dummies? Yeah? You're not a dummy. But really what it is that it's want to be able to guide you on your way through to the health and strength of your voice, right? Understanding just what Stuart said, which is that it is the best way that we have, the best tool in our toolkit for conversing and understanding and empathy and communication. And so really today, what I hope to leave you with is a discussion on health and hygiene, tone and timbre, perception, presentation, and practice. And hopefully leave you all with a better understanding of how your voice is that tool, probably the preeminent tool in your toolkit. So a little bit of my background, as I've just mentioned. I come from a long line of ministers, musicians, and teachers. And so it's probably no surprise to you that my house was full of lively conversation about all of the above. I grew up listening to great preachers, as my grandfather was a Baptist missionary and minister in the area. And so I come with a wealth of Baptist traditions and feel very at home speaking to you today. But please understand, I don't do what you do. So if I'm making assumptions or I'm putting some preconceived notions on what I'm telling you, please call me on it. I welcome the interaction and I welcome the questions as we go. My training happened early on here at Acadia. I started as a music major here, as a voice major. I made my way to New York for 10 years, went to the Juilliard School and was a traveling freelance opera singer for a number of years. Never in my wildest dreams did I expect to be back at Acadia. I was very, very happy as an opera singer. And the 10 years in New York were wonderful. And then there came a point where they weren't. And I think you can all understand that there's that shift in your life where you need to take a different path that was unexpected. And so I decided to continue my schooling and go on and get a PhD, which is in the music world called a DMA, Doctor of Musical Arts, in voice, pedagogy, and performance. Now, the irony to that is that I almost flunked, don't tell mom and dad, did not do well in grade 10 biology, which is the place when I was growing up where they taught you anatomy and physiology, right? Did not do well. Well, now I have a doctorate studies in the pedagogy and anatomy, basically, of the voice. And so what I teach you today is because I learned the hard way. And what I hope to leave you with is a better understanding of the thing we all have, but sometimes don't know a lot about, right? The organic beginnings of this workshop, I've been doing it now for 3 years. I started my own company. It's called Discover Your Dynamic Voice. And really the organic beginnings to that happened when a friend came and said to me, you know, every time I public speak, I'm hoarse. Can you help me? Can I have a lesson? And I thought, well, you don't sing. I don't know. Like I thought instantly about singing, but then I flipped that model on its head and I thought, oh, but she may not know singing, but I know the voice. And so I worked with this young female presenter, entrepreneur, and helped her understand her body and her voice and what she was doing that was causing some of the hoarseness. And since that time, the company has grown to a point where I've done this presentation for teachers, for real estate agents, for lawyers, but saved the best of all for my Baptist background today. So thank you so much again for having me. Questions to start. Have you ever finished a presentation, a sermon, a speech, a meeting, and felt tired or hoarse? That's a fair question we all have. Is your voice ever been told to you to be too soft or not well heard? Have you ever been told you lacked confidence, which in turn makes you look like you don't know what you're talking about, when in fact you do? Have you ever had a moment, can you reflect on a moment where you've heard your voice on an answering machine and you thought, that was me? Does that what I sound like? Right. So understanding what this is inside and how it's used is a really big part of what we do. The sound of the speaker's voice matters twice as much as the content of the message. Right, I found that. According to a study last year by Texas Communications Company. Further to that, did you know that lower toned or lower pitched voices are received twice as favorably as higher pitched voices? Well, who does that negatively impact right off the bat, right? Tenors and females. So let's work with that, right? I think we really can. I think we can understand that what we're given isn't always necessarily what we have to put up with. There's a way that we can work and manipulate and be constantly aware of how we use that voice. Your voice is an asset. The medium is the message. The message is the medium. Lose your voice, you lose what? Connections, lost wages, opportunities. Look right now at the current US political climate. I know you don't want to, but look at it. Every presidential candidate in the history of presidential candidates has gone on tour and lost their voice. They do that because they use the microphone and they don't recognize that the microphone is amplification for what they're doing in their body. So the better we understand what happens here, the easier this guy's job is. But we can't rely solely on the microphone. What about having more tools in your toolkit for finding that right tone for situations that you all deal with every day, right? The right message, that emphatic speech you have to give to get more money, that emphatic speech you have to give when the crux of the issue needs to be communicated, that moment in counseling where you need an empathetic tone, that moment where you need to understand the difference in delivery, the drop off of a sentence. All of that is your world. Keeping your voice healthy and being aware of its potential is something that a lot of people don't think about. Again, we all have one, so we think we understand it. So we're going to dive a bit into grade 10 biology. We're going to talk about vocal health and hygiene, okay? Forgive me if you've heard some of it before, but what I recognize is that although you've heard it before, what happens easily with all of us is that when life gets busy and we do our jobs, we forget the simple things that it takes to make our life easier. So for example, I've been here for 12 years at Acadia, and every September for the first 3 or 4 years, I would be hoarse. I would be so excited to get back to teaching. I would be so delighted to deliver the message, to work all day at speaking and talking and mentoring to students, that by the end of September, I would have nothing. Now, the irony of that is I'm the person on campus that has the most knowledge about the voice, and even I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out that if I gave myself time to breathe before I spoke, that breath was what was fueling my voice, that the instrument itself functions because I breathe. But if I didn't take time to breathe and I just talked and I got so excited because I had so much to share, guess what happens? The cords are so tiny that they had friction between them. And I got a lot of hoarseness at the end of September. So I'm gonna put this guy down, don't fall. Your vocal cords, for those of you who forget, grade 10 biology, are no thicker than 2 pieces of paper. Right. And for those of us that sing in loud, long places, that's a lot of sound coming out of these tiny little things. When they vibrate together, think of a fan blowing them apart. That's your air. That's why we breathe. Well, we breathe to live, but that's why we breathe to speak. Why we breathe to speak is so that air goes between them. If air doesn't go between them, they are rubbing. So you can think, those of you who are better than I at things like bicycles and cars, if you don't have oil in the right places on the gears, what happens, right? So what happens when we do that and we speak from here and we don't breathe before we speak is we haven't put the buffer between our cords. Now, easy to say, hard to do. And especially hard when some of you don't have the training to remember what that even feels like. Well, I thought I breathed. What does breath even do? Where does it go? So really quick anatomy lesson. The front of your body, remember, there is spleen, stomach, intestines, yell them out, gallbladder, babies, liver, yeah. So no room for air, hey? But if you find your rib, and if you remember that the rib is protecting the lung, you will find that that rib cage goes all the way to the back. That the place where the air lives is not in the front, but we spend 90% of our time breathing from here and filling to here, because we can talk on the phone and do that, right? We can talk to so-and-so in a counseling meeting who's this far apart. I don't have to worry about projection. So I breathe from here, and then at the end of the day, I'm hoarse. So if you can access that place that's lower, if you can be aware, and you can do this sitting in your chair, this is audience participation, folks. At home, audience participation. So if you can lean into the back of your chair when you breathe, part of what I really want you to try to do is to feel whether your ribs in the back move, right? That's where the most of the balloon of the lungs is. You do it on your own. I'm not going to take a poll here. But the most of your air lies in the back of your body, but we don't access that 90% of our day, right? And so when we need it, it's not a habit. We haven't thought of it that way. But I want to encourage you to remember that even a breath that's better than you are used to, doesn't have to be mine, doesn't have to propel me over a 60-piece orchestra and 3,000 seats, but it's better than the one you might be used to giving, is going to help you and the longevity of your instrument, which is your voice. So that breath, if you think of that breath like the oil on the cogs of your gear, it needs to be there. And quite frankly, aren't we more authentic and aren't we better able to communicate in an authentic way when we've prepared by breathing before we speak, when we've thought about what we want to say, when we've allowed the breath to be the intention to our communication? I leave you with that. And I have lots of books on that, so you can talk to me more about that. Let's shift gears about our daily life. I have 2 small children. One's not so small, he's taller than me now, but they run the house and they are busy, and quite often I run on coffee because that's what we do. Unfortunately, coffee is a dehydration agent, and coffee will take moisture from your body, as will other things, and we need to, those of us that use our voice, we need to refill the moisture in our body. And so I know you've heard it, and the FDA, the Canadian Food and Drug Association, recommends 8-ounce glasses of water a day. And when I tell my students this, my students who are singers, and I say, you need twice as many as a singer, they go, but I'll be peeing all day. Yes, you will. And that means it's healthy. Because quite frankly, one of the myths of water is that when you swallow it, you're hydrating your cords. But if you really take a second to think about what that is, if you swallowed water and it went between your cords, you would die. Because the cords are in the part of the windpipe where air goes, not food. So water takes a great deal of time to go through your body, and all the other organs that need it first will take it. And then they're like, oh yeah, those vocal cords, they could probably have some, because the vocal cords don't keep you alive. but they are an instrument to what you do. So I encourage you, your goals for today: breathe better, drink more water. Okay, again, if you're finding after long meetings and you're finding before the day begins that you're feeling dry, guaranteed by the end of the day, when you've used your instrument a lot, you will have minor damage, whether you can see it or hear it or feel it. So my recommendation is get the water in early so that the rest of the day your body is using it, right? Because that one sip before you public speak, nothing. It might help your nerves, might actually give you a moment of calm, breathing before you swallow and speak, all good things. Is it actually making its way back around to the cords, which need to be moist, which need to be supple and soft, right? What happens when wood gets dry? It cracks, right? That's the last thing you want for the cords. The cords need to have air and they need to have moisture, okay? So I'm changing your whole life now, right? Drink more, breathe better, you got it, great. No problem, Christianne. Let's talk about projection and the breath. So I'm going to speak loudly. I'm good at it. I've been it since I was little, and then they trained me to be better at it. It's a no-win situation. I'm always loud. I can always be heard. But I promise you that projection from here is not the kind of projection that you want, but we all do it. That's why those public speakers in the US right now are hoarse, because they're talking from here. But projection actually is how we take the air in the tank or the gas in the tank and how you run your car. So for those of you who are better at cars than me, you will know that the right RPMs and the right gear and the right oil and the right kind of gas make your car run at an optimum level, right? That's the same for your body. So the right combination of air and water and use of projection. Okay, so what is projection? Projection, we all want it. It's tone, it's timbre, it's volume. We want to be heard, but how do you get projection? How do you do it? You do it from here, you're toast by the end of the day. What I want you to consider, and you can all play with this in the comfort of your hallways and bathrooms. That's when the best playing happens. I want you to consider what you can do with your voice when you're having fun. So for those of you with children or grandchildren or a cat or a dog, I guarantee that you have made your voice do something that you wouldn't do in the pulpit, okay? Perhaps. Well, maybe you would do it in the pulpit, but not everybody. You might have manipulated your sound in a way to be silly or playful. That kind of manipulation is projection. You're placing it in a different way. You're putting your voice in a different place. So projection encompasses all the bones in the front of your face, the makeup of the mask of your head. That's where that real ringiness comes from when it comes to my world, when it comes to really sending you sound. It's not just how much air you have or how thick or big or well-trained your cords are. It's what did I do? Sorry, John. It's how you're using the voice and where you're putting it. So next time you're playing with the cat or you're visiting your grandchildren, I encourage you to play around with what that feels like. Because again, while we might be stuck with something, born with something, there is an element of being able to control it for situations that we need to be able to control it for. So for example, anybody watch The Nanny in the 90s? Fran Drescher's voice is very annoying. And it's right there in the nose, and she places it in the nose, and then she overdoes it because it's funny, right? We can all do that, okay? What about if there's a baby? We can take it away from the mask, and we can take it away from the projection, and the air is not hitting all the bones, so it's very quiet. And I can lessen my tone, and I can take it away. You can do this too. It doesn't take training, it just takes being able to have fun, right? So as you're talking about projection, really acknowledge that it's not simply yelling, it's not simply volume, because if the volume only comes from here, then you aren't sort of aligning all the other things we need, right? Which is that loud and emphatic, but you can't turn people off by that sound, right? So projection doesn't mean strident. Projection doesn't mean nasal. So you have to find that within your own voice. You have to figure out, okay, if I place it too far forward and I go for nasal and I sound like Fran Drescher, oh boy, somebody just shut right down. I lost them. That message was gone. If I talk too low, if I speak too low, if I practice my public speaking down here, yes, the research suggests that I, as a female speaker, will be better received when my voice is here. However, I can already tell you that I'm not using my air and I'm not sending it forward like I would if I was putting it here, okay? So for me, it's something that I'm willing to run the risk on by having it healthier and more forward. But you can all do that. You can all play. You can all pretend to see what you feel like in that day. It's going to make you healthier because then you'll understand how the instrument works. I use this example all the time about a car because I just get in and I drive. I don't understand any of it. That's why I have my dad, right? So, but that's a very poor example because it's not what I want you to be doing, right? I want you to do the opposite. I want you to take apart your instrument. I want you to understand it fully and understand the capability behind it. What we are given isn't necessarily all that we have to work with, okay? What about clearing your throat? Wait. What's it doing to these tiny little creatures when you clear your throat? Yep, they're rubbing together with no air. So again, habit building stuff. Hey, we all do it. For some of us, it's actually a nervous habit. We get up to speak, we get up to read something that we've prepared in the moment. We need to take a second. Again, I'll just encourage you to acknowledge when that happens, to reflect on when and why that might be happening, and to choose to do two other things instead. One would be swallow. Yeah, one would be take a sip of water. Both end up doing the same thing. But before you speak, it's not so much that the water is clearing your throat as it is giving you a second to swallow the gunk away that you think is there by rubbing that together by making a noise. So the less you can make a noise, the less you can rub together and have friction, the healthier your cords will be all day long, right? But for many of us, it's a habit that's hard to break. So I'll just acknowledge we all have those habits. Some are easier to get rid of than others. I leave you with all these things to let you think about them, not because I'm going to solve all your problems. How about posture? So anatomy 101, right? We've talked about where the breath is. We've talked about how we need to access it. And then what do? We sit like this. How does that help us access anything that we need, which is down here? P.S. That's why we breathe the way we do, because we sit like this, right? Give me a high five. Well done. You sat up. Thank you. Loved it. Look, he's learning. He's learning. One of the things, again, to think about, right? When you're standing to access the breath, it's like putting a lot of gas in your gas tank and then squeezing the pipe so it can't get to the car. You might be able to actually inhale very nicely. You might be able to breathe very nicely. But then if you hunch around, the air isn't able to come back up to where it's needed. These are things to think about when you're sitting on the phone, having that very difficult conversation in a counseling session where you need, maybe even in the hospital where you are in a pastoral relationship where your body is not standing reading a sermon. These are the moments actually when we're probably doing the most damage, when you're whispering. Whispering is not a healthy thing to do, right? So be conscious of these things, be aware. I am not suggesting you shouldn't do them. We all need to do things with our instruments in our body that aren't healthy. But what we do need to do is be aware of what we're doing, right? So that we can counteract that in another way. Delivery, staccato, sharp, high, under-supported, whispering, all that kind of delivery. You are your best critics, right? Congregations might think they are, they aren't, you are. Listen to your recordings. Listen to your public speaking. Acknowledge when you breathed, when you ahemed, when you actually made a run-on sentence so that you didn't have any air in between. Acknowledge how you felt after that sermon, right? Reflect on the use of tone and timbre all the way through the range that you can access when your voice is healthy. I should be able to flow easily between low tones and high tones so that I can use those tones to better demonstrate and illustrate my content, my emotion. If I cannot, because I'm hoarse, what is the person on the other side able to receive? Okay? Were we able to use our best tools in that moment if our instrument is not healthy? So listen to yourself, okay? Go back on that answering machine. Oh, it's horrifying. I understand it, I promise. Places you can do damage. These are not fun places. These are places where you're probably actually living your life. These are probably places where you are not working, right? So when I take my kids to the hockey game and they're cheering and I want to cheer, what have I just done? Shoot, right? When I have to talk over somebody or in a restaurant with loud music, what have I done to the instrument that I then need to use the next day? So these things are not things to say, stay home and, never go to a restaurant again. But these are things to say, when you do, please acknowledge what you've done. And on the flip side, please make sure you've added water. Please make sure you've added silence. Please make sure you've added a time to be restful and relaxed with your cords so that they can heal. The best analogy I give is runners who, after a marathon, they rest, right? So they're resting those muscles that they've used. They ice them, they heat them, they relax them, they don't run again, probably for a while. Same with us. Not to not do your life, not to not have your life. Remember, I spent a lot of time talking to 20-year-olds about this, right? You need to have a life, but you have to acknowledge what those choices do to your ability to have an instrument that works, okay? And I really want you to acknowledge that even an awareness of going out in a loud place and speaking over the music or over people at a party, you will absolutely not have the full range, the full timbre, the full capability the next day. No question about it, okay? So just acknowledge what might need to be done in order to work against those things. Tone and timbre. Anybody have a definition or an idea of what they think tone and timbre might encompass? Tricky to understand. We all understand it when we hear it, right? Any thoughts? Audience participation moment.
When you're playing with the radio, play with the tone, but
great. It's a great example. Yeah, that one's such a good example because it's outside your own body, right? You know exactly what to do. You turn a button and all of a sudden things are brighter, sharper, mellower, there's more bass, there's more, right? We can do that here too. It's not as easy. You can't turn a button, right? Yeah, tone. What is the balance of the sound you hear, right? Is it too breathy? Is it too low? Is it too flat? Do I not have sort of a lilt to my sound? Am I not using an appropriate timbre? Am I being too harsh for the situation? Those things I want to comment on because quite often we confuse those things with volume, right? And quite often volume has nothing to do with message. Quite often, more often than not, it's tone and timbre that is the best thing for your message rather than volume, okay? So we think volume is how we're emphatic. Again, the US presidential, they only have one tone and timbre, those US presidential candidates. They only have one, and it's loud or not, okay? They don't change tone or timbre. Most of them do not have a great understanding. I wish I could, if only they'd hire me. The understanding of tone and timbre is everything. It's not just volume. So when you think you need to be louder, again, there's a moment to do so, of course, but also recognize there's a lot to be done within the choices that we talked about earlier, about the way you play with your instrument, the way you play when you think of the baby or the kitten, or you're angry at your child. That voice is loud. And that's probably a very strident tone and timbre in that voice. That probably is not the best choice for the sleeping child, right? Or the 12-year-old who aggravates you. Yes, that's a good choice. Yeah. Yeah. What about how our ears receive it? Oh, please. Yeah, timbre. No, it's a hard one. So the timbre of a voice, the timbre of anything is the temporal. So it comes from the word temporal, the temporal understanding of what our ears receive, the sonic understanding. So tone and timbre are quite often used interchangeably, but for a voice, tone is really directly related to what we use as words like strident or mellow. Tone can be described in that way, whereas timbre can be described more emotionally with a voice, right? So if my timbre changes, but not necessarily my tone, they can be interchangeable, but they are tricky to define separate from one another, which is why we talk about them together. When we talk about a healthy classical artist, a healthy singer, when we talk in my terms, the idea that timbre is best described as color, the color of somebody's voice, right? Is it warm? Is it rich? Is it harsh, right? Tone is more consistent. Your tone is gravelly. Your tone is low. Your tone is something. Timbre is more of a color word, a descriptive term. Does that help? It isn't easy to describe on the fly, and especially when you combine the two together. Yeah, thank you for the question.
With regards to timbre, does pace play a role in it?
Absolutely. Pace, I will get to in a second, but pace is directly related to breath which is directly related to tone and timbre. Absolutely. You can manipulate all of the above with breath, which if you're going too fast, can impact your tone and your timbre. 100%. Great question. Oh, yay! You ask questions. How do our ears receive it was what I was going to say. It's a great segue from your question. How do our ears receive it? So if someone needs to say something to me that's very important, a loud volume doesn't necessarily do the trick. In fact, sometimes when somebody talks like this all the time, we shut off, right? So volume is absolutely connected to the receptors in the ear. Remember, it's not just you and your body's health, it's how are they receiving what your message is and what you want to convey. So really understand you're making choices for your own health, but you're also making choices so that your content is delivered in a successful way, okay? So both of those are important. What's the optimal range and register for best effectiveness? So we talked earlier, one of the initial points I made in a study that's recently been done is that lower voices have a better success rate within presentations. There's actually a whole field of study in women in leadership that I've been working on. I was a keynote speaker with Eleanor Beaton, who's a female fierce power leader in women in leadership here in Nova Scotia. And one of the things she talks about is how we do ourselves in as females when we only use what was given to us and we don't acknowledge we can do much more with our own voices. Because unfortunately, the statistics are that register and range plays a great deal to play, a great part in your audience's ability to receive the information. So if you aren't willing, as a female, to do the work, to acknowledge when range and register can play a part, but to be fair, so can the men, okay? And so range and register is key. Do I want to be up here and be pointed? And for those of you who have great range as men, right, you know when you have a higher voice, maybe you do use it on your 12-year-old. Maybe that's the voice that your 12-year-old gets when they're angry, the higher pitched voice. But you also have a capability to come down, right? You just have an entirely different range set than we do, right? But we can all play within it. And range and register can play a great role, rather than, again, just the volume button. I'm going to steal your analogy. That's a really good one. I'm going to use it for the next presentation. The button about tone on the car. I like it. Pitch and sustaining sound. How do we sustain sound? How do I make a long line, or even how do I just continue to talk without breathing? Sustaining a sound, understanding how to do that, to stretch out a word, to use the breath, to use the voice is different than talking like this. And I do those things not to poke fun, but to make you hear, to make you analyze. It's so much easier in others to hear it when somebody else does it, right? When somebody talks like this, as opposed to having connectiveness between the words, the receptors in the ears are much more likely to be pleasantly surprised, right? And to take in what they're saying. Even if they vehemently disagree with your opinion, they're going to receive it more positively if you're really aware at how your speech pattern is happening. So range, timbre, tone, staccato, connective, all those things play a role. We can play with our voices in a way that, again, you know how to do. I don't know how many times I've had conversations with people who say, I am an awesome singer in the car, right? I sound like Pavarotti in the shower, right? You know that you can play with your voice because you've done it. All of you have done it. You can't hide from me. So the hallway or the stairwell or the bathroom, all those places that give you that resonance, the place where your voice can bounce off of something and you go, whoo, whoo, right? Fun. It's fun. So I want to encourage you to take all these ideas, to percolate on them and to play with them in those spaces that you find safe and comfortable, but also spaces that are going to give you the feedback that you need. Don't do it in your living room. Don't do it with the couch that's going to absorb everything and you're going to think, boy, that didn't sound different at all, right? Do it in a place where your sound bounces off and you get some resonance. You get some ability to really identify and hear clearly what you've done. It's going to be the best idea rather than in a space that has lots of things to absorb your sound. So couches and curtains are not your friend. Tile bathrooms, toilets, awesome. I have a little worksheet that I'd like to pass around here as we, oh, Mr. Stewart, want to be my assistant? Yes, please. Yep. I'll just speak while I do it because it's really something for you to laugh at and something for you to reflect on. And if you see yourself in these things in the worksheet, I'm not poking fun at you, except I am in a little bit, but you should also poke fun at yourself. Being able to understand who we are and what people receive us as is part of this exercise. Some of these people on here may not be known to you. There's a lot of pop culture references in this worksheet. What I will simply ask is that in that bathroom or in that hallway, that you play pretend a bit with some of these voices, okay? That you acknowledge, you know, who Marge Simpson is and what she sounds like, right? Instantly, for those of us that watch The Simpsons, you know what that voice is, right? Chris Matthews on NBC, he's a voluminizer. He has one sound, one level, and one thought, and no differentiation with tone and timbre. Next time you listen, you will know. He talks up here all the time. Everything sounds like this. Everything's the end of the world, okay? So I give you this because I want you to really find yourself in it. I want you to see I'm a combination of this and that, and I think if I'm really being honest, I could do better at this. And they're meant to give you snapshots and snippets of what is out there. They're not meant to make you feel bad about yourself. Let me be really honest. I have spent my career being criticized for my voice. I have made a career being criticized for my voice. I have taken every criticism. You're too loud, you're too soft, you're too quiet, you're not pretty enough vocally. The other is a whole nother session. The idea that you can have this thing in your being and be criticized about it is a very personal thing. I understand that it is part of us. It's not a clarinet that you can take apart and put away. So I very much understand what this does to some people and the psyche that it is to acknowledge that you might be one of the people on this list, okay? I acknowledge it. I also think we're better when we're self-reflective. I also think that we're better if we're able to say, look, I took this criticism and I didn't take it as a bad thing. I took it because I really wanted to be better at what I did. I wanted to do better, right? I wanted to learn. So I give you this to play with. I give you this to have fun with. If you feel like taking it back and finding a partner and practicing some of these voices, please do so, okay? One of the things I also want to mention very clearly before we wrap is that I am also, in all of this, a firm believer in authenticity. And so while I talk to you about the ways to manipulate and the ways to understand and the ways to acknowledge what you're given doesn't have to be the only way to use your instrument, I also acknowledge and understand that what we do has to be human, it has to be from us, and it has to be real. And the last thing that I would want you to leave today thinking is that she told me to be somebody I'm not, or that she told me to use a voice that's not me. There is a way and a delicate balance to do both. And I really want you to know that authenticity through everything you do, obviously you of all people know these things, but I would not pretend to be speaking and standing in front of you and say that you should be anything but. I simply say that I think there is a way to find more in your toolkit than you realized you had. That's still authentic, that's still real, but that's chosen and planned for the purpose, for the content, for the context of why you use it. So with that in mind, let's talk about pace and presentation, okay? A little bit different. Pace and presentation, this goes to another workshops when we start to talk about how we speak and the words we use to speak. A lot of people, a lot of our students, our current younger student body will have a problem with ending their phrases in a question, right? It's called the uptick, yeah? And I can tell you something that I firmly believe in, but if I end with an uptick, you don't believe me at all because it sounds like I don't know anything. And so that's presentation. That's acknowledging, that's listening, that's understanding that what we might be saying or how we might be saying it can actually directly impact the ability to get our message across. So I did a workshop for young female entrepreneurs. They were all in their 20s. They all did an uptick. Every single one of them introduced themselves and they said, "Hi, I'm Samantha Jones." I said, "Are you really?" Because it sounds like you don't know your own name. It was a question mark at the end of her name. That's the basic, right? And they go, "Oh," because that's as basic as it gets. If you don't know your name, if you're not clear, handshake, here's my name. They didn't see it. They didn't recognize it. And it's the first thing that you will hear, and it will make you sound like you don't know. You don't know? Question mark. Okay, so what about breath in presentation? You know speed, you know delivery, you understand it. Take more of it. The time that it takes for your audience, your membership to receive, to process, to acknowledge means you need to breathe more often. And trust me when I tell you that takes practice. That's practicing in your sermon. There's a breath, mark it. That's not something that happens on the fly. In music, we practice breathing in practice rooms all the time. It just doesn't occur on the stage. We practice when, where, how much, how long. Because if we don't, the next phrase doesn't do what we want it to do. So when I say practice, I don't mean just write the sermon. I mean, practice speaking it. See where the breath needs to fall. See where the breath needs to fall for you so that you're healthy. But see where the breath needs to land so that we receive it, so that you give us the time to take it in and to receive it. We need to breathe too. Practice, record, analyze, did all those things. Conclusion. Oh, you're so happy. She's done. Acknowledge what your voice is. What it is that's in your bag of tricks, what's in your toolkit. And know that it is just like those books on your bookshelf that you care for, that you think, that's a book I would never get rid of because at some point I'm going to need to pull it out and there's a chapter that I might need to use. I know those books. We had a basement full of them when my grandfather passed. I think some of them are in the basement of the Div College right now. I know what a resource is. I have shelves of music books. This is also a resource, right? Understand what's in your toolkit. Understand when and how to use it. It is keeping your voice at an optimum level is another way to find professional success. This is all part of it. It's like a book. It's like a conference. It's investing in you. Don't discount warming up your instrument. What? Yes. So my son, my 8-year-old, has recently come up with a very funny joke. He loves it because he knows it drives me nuts. He says, Mommy, how does an opera singer warm up? He says, do, re, mi, 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 because opera singers are all about me. Okay, so if the joke didn't land on you, I'll explain it later. Promise. He loves it because he knows it gets a rise out of me. Warming up your voice. You've all heard the crazy opera singers do their things. We take time to do it because it's our instrument. I encourage you to do the same. There's lots of things you can do. Humming, trilling, breath work in the car on the way to the 10 a.m. service. Take a second before you get up to speak. That's all a warm-up. That's all a setting your instrument up for success. You would never play with a clarinet without first breathing into it, warming it up, using the reed, making it accessible. Same idea, right? And if you want warm-ups for speakers, I've got a ton of them and I'm happy to share them. Play with your tone and timbre. Play with it. Have fun. Make it silly. You will learn a lot by doing so. Use those grandchildren. They're fun for lots of things, hey? Be aware of the posture. We talked about that. Be aware when you're sitting in those counseling sessions. Be aware when you're on the phone. Be aware in the day-to-day activities that aren't going to help you when you need it the most, okay? And finally, drink more water than you think is humanly possible. The number one comment I get about that is that, well, there is such a thing as overhydration. There is actually a very serious thing as overhydration. I promise you, this is nowhere near it. You'd have to drink 2 of those big jugs that the football players, you'd have to do that to be in danger. You're not in danger. We don't, as normal Joe Blow who sits at a computer all day, we don't even make the 8 glasses that the FDA approves. Usually those of us who are just sitting for a living, when you use your voice, you need to do better, a lot better, right? So that's your plan for 2020, New Year's resolution. And finally, if you want to learn more or if you have an opportunity for one-on-one coachings, find me. I am super passionate about this work. I've done it for everybody you can think of. Preachers, teachers, lawyers, leaders, real estate agents, you name it. Feel free to find me and talk to me more. I am passionate about helping you do what you do best. Thank you, Baptists. I love you all. That was awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Question? Waving to people at home. Hi. Oh, sorry, Stuart. On the mic, then it gets recorded? Good idea.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I think when I'm trying to make a point, now when I hear it, I'm not sure if I like it. I think it lands in the back of my throat.
Absolutely.
And it ends up more whispery than I want it to be, or more breathy than I want it to be.
Okay.
Where should I land that?
Great question. What's your name? Hello, Christopher. Great question from Christopher. So when you want to make a point and you're being emphatic, the first thing we do is we speak from here, because that's where our instrument lives. And so we go there and we use it. And what we forget, go back to biology 101, is that actually without this, without the resonators that I talked about, which is the places where the sound hits, without where the sound goes, and without the water to make sure that the cords are lubricated, we are unsuccessful in all of those things. So while we think it comes from here and while we want it to come from there, it's not. So the first thing I would acknowledge for you to do is to breathe before you start to speak. The second you do that, it comes from being in the back to being more forward. That's the resonators. You've breathed in, then that breath has to leave your body. Guess how it leaves? It leaves while you speak. That's exhalation. Okay? So the second you do that, the second you breathe, and then you use that air, you have taken it from just being here to leaving your body. That's huge. The second piece of what happens is that the air also touches here, tingles in your mask. And those are those resonators. Those are those toilets and sinks and wonderful things that your sound hits off of, not curtains. That's also helpful to bring it forward. Air will do both of those things if you breathe before you start. The other thing is that emotion is such a powerful thing, right? And so when we're emphatic, when we want to get a point across, we do things that actually are not to our benefit. So I watched myself for years in recordings, VHS at the time, the two giant VHS recorders. I watched myself for years in an emotional situation do that. It was very emotional as a singer, extremely emotional. And guess what it did? My sound was crap. Nothing was beautiful. The emotion I thought I was giving was totally pinched because I wanted to do something, because I wanted to feel it, that emphatic nature, that I want to get my point across. We do things that actually don't help ourselves. Yeah. I would acknowledge a few of those things before you start that point. I would say to myself, how am I going to get this point across? Where is it going to come from? Can I breathe my intention before I speak? Can I think about what I want to say? And the thought alone makes your brain breathe. Breathe an emotion, breathe sadness, breathe happiness, breathe whatever it is today that you feel. When you breathe it, when you think it, you will breathe it. It's real that way. It's also authentic that way. Right? So this idea that you want to just give from here just takes 1 or 2 seconds of thought. And it doesn't take a lot of anatomy knowledge to move it forward from here. It's a super great question. It's also one of the ways that we get stuck by thinking the instrument lives here. It does, but it is a very complex being in the rest of your body as well, right? Great question. I'm becoming. Hello.
How are you?
I'm super.
Awesome. I'm Danny.
Hi, Danny.
And I have a cold. One of the things that...
So you're very good at being nasal right now, Danny. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
One of the things that I find that's annoying sometimes when I'm speaking, and it probably only happens once or twice a month, is that I'd be probably about halfway through a sermon, and all of a sudden, my voice cracks, and it sounds like I'm back in puberty again for a few sentences, and all of a sudden it kind of kicks back, and everything's normal. So any ideas? What's going on?
Plenty of ideas. Let me give you the easy ones, okay? Because I can talk for hours about all this. That's what I do, and it is a lifelong process to understand. Thanks for the question, Danny. So I tell my male students this, and again, these are these moments you wonder why they don't run screaming. A male voice doesn't fully develop until it's 40. I know. So those young singers, sorry, John. Those young singers that I have at 18 and 19 that want to figure it out now, and I tell them this is a process and a journey that takes 20 years because you yourself are not yet done developing as a young male human. Some singers at 17 and 18 have barely built the instrument they're going to be singing on, right? They are not finished developing in all ways, shapes, and sizes. And so the settled of a complete instrument is like having a piano with only 80 keys instead of 88. So you are not alone in your journey, Danny. And it does take time. And so if you were really to reflect on the fact that you didn't have a fully formed instrument, women, it's 30, men, it's 40. You didn't have a fully formed instrument until you were 40. It's no wonder you still have these moments. It's very normal and natural. Again, if I'm being really honest, it's because you haven't yet worked on what is now a fully formed instrument. You've been working your whole life with this instrument, right? You know how to talk. You've been screaming since a baby. What you haven't been working with is this instrument that's now done. It's still actually fairly new. So now we have to recognize, whoa, that sound when I thought I was going to do that, did that. And when I actually talked for too long halfway through the sermon and I forgot to swallow, breathe, and use the air, that's when it cracks. It cracks because the chords are fickle and little and tiny. And it cracks because you haven't lined them up correctly. So think of a Jenga game, right? Think of how they have to be perfect on top of one another. And if one is not, then the whole thing crumbles. So when the chords come together, if one is just slightly off kilter because you've run out of air and you're forced through it, that's when that crack comes off. That's when that crack happens. So two thoughts right off the bat. The first is that if you're still cracking, and all of us do, even women do too, it's just not as tied to puberty as it is for men. The first thing to do would be to plan more breaths. Remember that conversation I had about looking through your sermon and planning those moments where you yourself, for your vocal health, need to find places to breathe and put them in, mark them in, right? Especially if you're telling me quite often halfway through that happens, that's a big sign to me. If I had a singer who was consistently hoarse halfway through a song, that's the first thing we would do. Let's reflect backwards. Where was that moment backwards that you started getting into trouble? Okay, now let's go there, plan a breath there, and then maybe moving forward, it won't be so difficult. The second thing is water. If it's cracking, it's because it's slightly brittle. And slightly brittle means friction, means not as supple, means not as usable. That's where you lose tone and timbre. You lose the ability to have tone and timbre. So I would suggest a few things to try. And I'm really interested, Danny, because I want to hear from you next time. Try more water earlier in the morning and try planning for more breaths. And I'm very sure, I mean, we can also have a few voice lessons, but I'm very sure that those things will help you on your journey to not have that consistently happening. Thank you. The microphone is yours, sir.
Two aspects of that question, I guess. I was once in touch with a person who worked in municipal government when I was public librarian. And the name I had on the paper was Shirley something. And when I was speaking with the individual, the voice was very high. And I automatically assumed that I was speaking with a woman, but it was the male administrator for the municipality. And I was a little bit embarrassed about it, but it was off-putting.
Yeah.
The high voice from a male. And then I've been, I was on the phone with some people and my voice was higher than I thought. And same thing happened to me. Ma'am was the response. And I always thought my voice was lower. And you say listening to the answering machine. But what I want to ask was with regards to if your voice is higher than you think you'd like it to be, or in terms of, as you said, you're given what you're given. But what can you do in that regard? Are there things you can do without putting on a fake big bass voice?
What's your name?
Dave Cumby.
Hi, Dave. Thank you for the question. And we know now, and especially in 2020, we know that gender and timbre and quality of voice are not directly related to gender. We know that more and more, in fact. And so thanks for the question, because it's a fair one, right? When I speak about those females in leadership, we're using terminology that's very binary for that. And we know that that's not always the case. But to answer the question directly, what I would suggest is that you find a place where you can be safe, where you can feel free, because the second we're inhibited, we are actually creating a problem. We're actually creating a moment of where we could do harm. So what I would love to see you do, and for those of you that are interested in doing so, I would love to see you just be able to take your voice on one sound and talk on one sound and see how high you can go on that one sound and then come back and then say something else and then come back and play with where you optimally end up. And where you optimally end up is going to be your healthiest place, but then you need to record that. Then you need to know what that is. And if you yourself are not happy with that, there absolutely are things you can do But again, to your point, what is the authentic sound that I'm after, right? I can do a lot in the run of a sentence to show you how much range I have. What do I want to do that's going to be healthy and the best for communication is a different concept. So play, but record your playing, okay? And play with how much you think you actually can do. Yeah, lots of great commercials out there you can quote and be silly with. But I think the crux of your question is being confused for binary language and gender matters not, right? So if you're high-pitched male and somebody says, ma'am, I've gotten lots of opposites when I get on my gravel, you know, that's our problem, right? Not yours. I would want you to be comfortable with what you feel happy with and what you sound like. And there's ways to play, for sure, for sure.
Yeah, go on. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Andrew.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi. I was just wondering if you could share with us maybe as you approach a song and have to think about tone and timbre and breathing, once we have a sermon written in front of us and we're thinking about practicing, how would we go about the mechanics of thinking, how do I do what I want to do when I want to do it?
Wonderful question. Thank you for asking it.
Thank you.
I work in a world that's a little dissimilar to yours. Most of the music that I'm performing has been written for me. Hey, I'm not a composer, I'm not a singer-songwriter. I do my best work when somebody tells me what to do on the page. You guys are crafting that usually. You're starting from scratch. You're also the composer. And what a wonderful benefit that is to be able to write it, live with it, have it come from you authentically, and then figure out how to perform it. I think there's nothing better if it comes from you to start with. So already you have an advantage to emotional connection to the piece. We have to work very, very hard to find that, right? When I'm playing a 16-year-old boy, I have to work very, very hard to figure out how I am connected to that human that I have no lived shared experience with. But you have a direct connection to the words you've chosen to put on the page. They're yours. I would do two things. I would spend time away from it. And this is one of those brain things I think you already probably know, is that when you put something away and you come back, it's better, it's fresher, there's an ability to be reflective on it. Also, to be critical of it when it's your own words, it's hard to be critical. We spoke about that with when it's your own voice, right? It's hard to, because it's mine, don't criticize. It's easier to do so when you've given it some time and space. But I agree that probably one of the things lots of you do, and I know from lots of experiences, that those sermons are being written on Fridays and Saturdays, because there's Sunday morning. I shared nothing. I know nothing. That's not true. Would never be true. If they're written, this is life, this is the reality. This is why I joke about living on coffee, because I know how much water I need. I don't drink that much water. This is life. This is what we live with. What I would do as you're writing it is I would find those moments that you could add a color, a thought of an emotion, and a spot for the breath. So the idea that you would have, just like in music, you would have a shape, you would have a form, that when I lay out a piece of music in front of me, it's color coded for emotion, for form, for intention. But that other piece of the puzzle is that form directly impacts my breath. Okay? And it directly impacts how I practice. I also practice with emotions that I don't end up using on stage. So for example, there was a beautiful Schubert German lied that I practiced for a long, long time using the death of my grandfather as a way to use sorrow and to speak about death. And then I started bawling, and I realized that was not the right emotion to use, because if you can't perform, and that's what we're doing, but you have to find real and authentic emotion to connect to that. So I use a lot of color to map out my emotion, right? I use a lot of moment for breath. I use a lot of markings when it comes to shift, because those are also things you do in storytelling. Quick shifts, right? Use color, use pizza, use dogs, use cats, use something that's going to quickly, and then breath in between those moments. And if you're able, one of those lucky few that can write it on a Wednesday and put it away till Friday, do that too. I'm sorry. Sacrilegious, I'm so sorry. That would never happen.
That's what happens. I was just complaining about it. It is what happens.
I'm so sorry to be right.
Dr. Rushton, thank you very much.
You're
I think
welcome.
this has been fascinating. It's been so helpful.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I love it.
Good.
So,
Well, delighted. And come talk to me after, and you know where to find me. And thank you for sharing this incredible honor of having me on the stage as part of the Simpson Lectures. It's been a real blessing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.